It was early morning at JFK Airport. The air buzzed with the usual sounds of people dragging suitcases, announcements echoing through the halls, and coffee cups clinking on metal counters. Among the travelers that day was a woman dressed in a neat cream suit, calm and graceful as she made her way toward the boarding gate. She didn't look flashy or important, but there was something about her, something steady, confident, and peaceful. She wasn't in a rush, though the world around her seemed to be spinning fast. She had been traveling for business for years, but this flight was special. It was the company's new aircraft, sleek, modern, and comfortable. She wanted to experience the flight quietly, just like any other passenger, without people recognizing her. To everyone else, she looked like a normal traveler with a small purse and a soft smile. The boarding announcement came through the speakers, calling first-class passengers to line up. She waited patiently at the side, letting others go before her. She didn't believe in rushing or cutting lines, even though her ticket gave her that right. When her turn finally came, she handed her boarding pass to the agent with a kind smile. The agent scanned it, looked up, and said, "Enjoy your flight." "Ma'am?" She nodded and walked through the jet bridge, her heels making a soft tapping sound on the metal floor. As she entered the cabin, the smell of new leather filled the air. The first-class section looked spotless, wide seats, soft lighting, and smiling attendants ready to assist. But one attendant in particular stood near the entrance with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her tone was polite but distant as she greeted passengers. When she saw the woman approach, her expression changed slightly, as if confusion had passed through her mind. The woman walked calmly toward her seat, which was near the window. She placed her purse gently on the seat and began to take off her coat. Before she could settle, the attendant stepped closer and said sharply, "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong section." The woman looked up, a bit puzzled but still polite. "No, I believe this is my seat," she said softly. She pulled out her boarding pass to confirm. The attendant gave her a quick glance, not really looking at the ticket, and said, "This is first class. Economy is behind that curtain." Her voice had a hint of impatience, the kind that made people around uncomfortable. The woman kept her calm. "Yes, I'm aware. This is seat 2A, correct?" "Yes, but that seat's already taken," the attendant said firmly, crossing her arms. "You'll need to move." The passengers nearby started to look up from their newspapers and phones. Some seemed curious, others slightly embarrassed for the scene that was unfolding. The woman took a slow breath and handed her boarding pass again, this time directly to the attendant. "Would you please check again?" The attendant sighed but took the pass. Instead of scanning it, she just glanced at the name, frowned, and said, "I don't think this belongs to you." "Did someone print this for you?" There was an awkward silence. The woman tilted her head slightly and said, "That ticket was issued by the company." "It's correct," but the attendant's tone grew even sharper. "Ma'am, I'm asking you nicely to move to your proper seat before we delay takeoff. Please cooperate." The woman's patience was starting to thin, but she still spoke gently. "You haven't checked it properly. I assure you there's been no mistake." By now, other passengers were whispering. One man in the front row muttered, "Just check the ticket." But the attendant seemed determined to prove her point. She reached out and snatched the ticket out of the woman's hand, holding it close to her face. The sudden movement startled the woman. As the woman instinctively tried to steady her purse, the attendant's hand brushed against hers roughly in irritation, an unnecessary, dismissive gesture that drew gasps from a few onlookers. The sound of the purse falling to the floor echoed in the small cabin. A lipstick rolled across the aisle. The woman bent slowly to pick it up, her face calm but her eyes showing quiet hurt. When she stood up, she looked straight at the attendant and said softly, "You've made a very big mistake." Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, but something in the way she said it made the entire cabin go silent. Even the other flight attendants froze for a second. The woman adjusted her coat and stood straight, looking around the cabin. "You didn't even bother to read the name on that ticket, did you?" she asked gently. The attendant blinked, her face turning slightly red. She stammered, "Ma'am, I thought you—" Before she could finish, another attendant hurried over, sensing that something wasn't right. "Is everything okay here?" she asked quickly. "This passenger seems to think she's in first class," the first attendant said, her voice still defensive. "But her ticket—" The second attendant took the ticket, glanced at it properly this time, and her expression instantly changed. "Oh," she said softly, eyes widening. "Oh my goodness. This ticket is perfectly valid. The first attendant frowned. What do you mean? The second attendant whispered something close to her ear, something that made the color drain from her face. Then she turned to the woman and said, I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. Please have your seat. We'll make sure you're comfortable. But the woman didn't sit right away. She was calm, but there was a sadness in her eyes. It's not about comfort, she said quietly. It's about respect. The captain, who had been notified that something was happening in the front cabin, came out of the cockpit. He was a tall man with years of experience, and when he saw the tension in the room, his tone was firm. What seems to be the problem here? The first attendant quickly spoke up. Captain, there was some confusion about a passenger's seat. The captain took the boarding pass from the second attendant. Read it carefully, then looked at the woman. His expression changed instantly. Ma'am, he said with deep respect, I didn't realize you'd be joining us today. Welcome aboard. A quiet murmur spread among the passengers. The first attendant's eyes widened in shock, realizing that something about this passenger was not ordinary. The woman nodded slightly to the captain. Thank you, she said. Please continue as usual. I don't want any more attention. The captain nodded and turned to the attendants. Make sure she has everything she needs. And please, let's treat all our passengers with the same respect, shall we? The woman finally sat down, opening her small purse and placing her things neatly back inside. Her movements were slow, thoughtful. Around her, the other passengers watched in silence, some pretending not to, others clearly moved by how calmly she handled herself. As the plane began to prepare for takeoff, the first attendant stood frozen near the service area, her heart racing. She wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. She felt embarrassed, small, and confused. What had she done? Why had she been so quick to judge? Something deep inside her began to stir. A quiet realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't easily step back from. Meanwhile, the woman looked out of the window, watching the ground crew move below. Her thoughts were far away, not angry thoughts but reflective ones. She had faced worse things in her life than a rude attendant. She had built everything she had from nothing, step by step, with grace and patience. And now, sitting on her own company's plane, she understood more clearly than ever that humility could never be bought, and respect could never be demanded. It had to be earned. The engines roared to life. The plane began to taxi down the runway. The passengers around her adjusted their seatbelts, put away their devices, and prepared for takeoff. But the woman's mind was calm. She wasn't thinking about the incident anymore. She was thinking about what would happen after the flight, how she would handle this situation, and what lesson could be learned from it. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to humiliate anyone. What she wanted was change, a real, lasting change in the way people treated one another. And maybe, just maybe, this moment would be the beginning of that. As the plane lifted off into the bright blue sky, the light from the sun fell softly on her face. She closed her eyes and smiled slightly, almost as if she could already see the end of this story long before it arrived. The plane was now cruising smoothly above the clouds. The sun shone softly through the windows, and the quiet hum of the engines filled the air. Most passengers had settled into their seats, reading, napping, or scrolling through their screens. But the air around the first-class cabin still carried a strange kind of tension, quiet but heavy enough to be felt. The woman sat by the window, looking outside at the endless blue sky. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, calm, composed, and unreadable. She sipped her water slowly and said nothing. Inside, her thoughts were clear and measured. She had no anger, only disappointment. She had seen this kind of treatment before, though it always surprised her how quickly people made judgments without knowing the full story. A few rows behind her, the same flight attendant stood near the galley, pretending to arrange napkins and glasses, but her hands were shaking. Every time she glanced toward the front cabin, her stomach tightened. She wished she could go back and undo what she'd done. The image of the woman's quiet stare haunted her. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was regret. Another attendant walked up beside her and whispered, "You okay?" She forced a smile and nodded, though her voice came out weak. "Yeah, I'm fine, just a misunderstanding, that's all." But the other attendant didn't look convinced. "I think it's more than that. The captain knows who she is. You might want to keep things professional from now on." Her heart dropped a little more. She didn't dare ask what that meant. She only nodded and went back to folding napkins, hoping no one would notice the guilt on her face. Up front, the woman reached for her small bag and took out a book. She flipped through a few pages, but her mind wasn't really on the words. Instead, she thought about the irony of it all, flying quietly on her own company's plane, pretending to be just another passenger, and witnessing firsthand the behavior of her staff. She had planned this trip to test the quality of service, but she hadn't expected such a moment of disrespect. Still, she knew it was important not to react with anger. Power, she had learned long ago, should never be used to humiliate others. It should be used to guide and teach. A few hours passed. The plane's seatbelt signs turned off, and a soft voice came over the speaker announcing lunch service. The attendants began rolling out carts with meals. The smell of fresh bread and warm dishes filled the air. When it was time to serve the woman in seat 2A, the same attendant hesitated. She held the tray for a moment, unsure whether to go herself or ask someone else to do it. The lead attendant noticed her hesitation and said gently, "You should serve her. It's your section." Taking a deep breath, she picked up the tray and walked slowly down the aisle. When she reached the woman's seat, she set the tray down carefully and said softly, "Your meal, ma'am." The woman looked up, her expression calm. "Thank you," she said, her tone polite but distant. The attendant wanted to say something, anything to apologize, but her throat felt dry. All she managed to say was, "Would you like anything else?" The woman shook her head slightly. "No, this is fine." The attendant nodded quickly and stepped away, her eyes stinging with guilt. She wanted to cry but held herself together. For the rest of the meal service, she worked quietly, her usual cheerful voice replaced by a soft, serious tone. After lunch, the lights dimmed and most passengers began to rest. The woman closed her book and leaned back in her seat, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. Years ago, she had been treated the same way, looked down upon, dismissed, ignored. Back then, she had promised herself that if she ever rose high enough, she would never let pride take her humanity away. Now, sitting thousands of feet above the earth, she wondered how many more people faced the same quiet disrespect every day. About an hour later, the captain made another brief announcement. Afterward, he stepped out of the cockpit to check on the cabin. When he reached the woman's seat, he stopped beside her and said respectfully, "Everything comfortable, ma'am?" "Yes, thank you," she said with a gentle smile. "The flight has been smooth." The captain nodded. "Good to hear that, and again, I'm sorry for what happened earlier. I want you to know it's being addressed." She looked up at him with kind eyes. "There's no need for harsh punishment," she said softly. "Mistakes can become lessons if handled right." The captain hesitated, surprised by her calmness. "You're very gracious," he said. "I just believe people can change," she replied. "Sometimes they only need to be reminded of who they are." The captain nodded again, clearly moved by her words, and quietly returned to the cockpit. The attendant had overheard some of that conversation from a distance. It made her heart ache even more. She couldn't understand how someone could be so forgiving after what had happened. She wanted to make things right. She couldn't bear carrying this guilt until the end of the flight. Finally, she gathered her courage, took a deep breath, and approached the woman's seat once more. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I just wanted to say I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you earlier. There's no excuse for it. I misjudged you, and I was rude. I'm truly ashamed." The woman looked up at her, her expression thoughtful but not angry. She paused for a few seconds before answering. "Why did you assume I didn't belong here?" The attendant lowered her gaze. "I don't know," she whispered. "I guess I just made an assumption based on appearances. I wasn't thinking. It was wrong of me." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, it was wrong, but I can see that you regret it." She leaned forward slightly and said in a kind tone, "Don't let guilt eat at you. Just remember this moment the next time you meet someone you don't understand. Give them respect first, not judgment." Tears filled the attendant's eyes. "Thank you for being kind when I didn't deserve it," she said. The woman smiled faintly. "We all make mistakes." What matters is what we learn from them. The attendant nodded quickly, wiping her eyes before anyone could notice. I'll never forget that, thank you. Then she quietly walked away, her heart lighter but her mind full of reflection. For the rest of the flight, the atmosphere softened. The attendant worked with quiet care, greeting each passenger with genuine warmth. Even small gestures, offering a blanket, refilling a drink, checking if someone was comfortable, carried sincerity now. The other attendants noticed the change, and even they began speaking more kindly to passengers, as if something gentle had spread through the cabin. The woman, watching silently, smiled to herself. Sometimes she thought a single uncomfortable moment could open someone's heart more than 100 lectures. As the flight neared its destination, an announcement came that they would soon begin their descent. The cabin lights brightened and passengers started preparing for landing. The woman closed her book and looked out at the clouds breaking apart, revealing the faint outline of the city below. She thought about how strange life could be, how power and money didn't always command respect, and how true dignity came from patience and understanding. She had seen both arrogance and humility that day, and she knew which one would stay with her longer. When the plane finally landed and the passengers began to disembark, the woman waited until most had gone before standing up. The captain came, out once more to thank her personally, and the attendants stood quietly nearby, their faces respectful and sincere. As she stepped toward the door, the first attendant spoke softly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance today." The woman looked at her kindly and said, "Make it count." With that, she walked down the aisle and out of the plane, leaving behind a silence that carried both respect and reflection. The attendant stood there for a long moment watching her go. She didn't yet know who the woman truly was, but she knew she had just met someone extraordinary, and deep down, she felt that this wasn't the end of their story. Something told her the truth about who that passenger really was would soon come to light, and when it did, her life would never be the same again. The plane had landed an hour ago, and passengers were now moving through the bright, busy terminal. Some rushed to catch connecting flights, others waited for their luggage. The woman walked calmly through the crowd, her small bag in hand, her steps graceful and steady. She wasn't in a hurry. She had learned that rushing often made people miss the quiet lessons life tried to teach. The same flight attendant who had treated her unfairly stood near the arrival gate, helping passengers and thanking them as they left. Her smile looked polite, but behind it was a heart full of regret. She had spent the last few hours thinking about that woman's words. Give respect first, not judgment. They echoed in her mind again and again. After the plane had emptied, the flight attendants were called to gather near the lounge for a brief debriefing with their manager. The woman had already disappeared into the crowd, but the atmosphere among the crew was tense. Everyone had heard what had happened in first class, even though no one dared to speak about it openly. When the manager entered, she carried a serious look on her face. "Crew," she said firmly, "before we discuss the regular post-flight checklist, we need to address something important. I've been informed that there was an issue during boarding involving a first-class passenger. Is that correct?" No one spoke at first. Then the same attendant who had caused the trouble took a step forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she said, "It was me. I made a mistake." The manager crossed her arms. "Tell me what happened." The attendant took a deep breath. "A woman came into first class. I thought she didn't belong there. I spoke to her in a rude way and didn't check her ticket properly. I realize now that I treated her unfairly. I'm sorry." The room went silent for a moment. The manager's face softened slightly. "Do you know who that passenger was?" The attendant shook her head. "No, ma'am, but the captain seemed to know her." The manager nodded slowly. "You'll find out soon enough. She wasn't just any passenger. She's someone very important." The attendant frowned. "Important? How do you mean?" The manager leaned forward a little, her voice quiet but firm. "She's one of the owners of this airline's parent company." The attendant froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "What?" "Yes," the manager continued. "She's an executive who sometimes travels anonymously to check service quality. She believes that the best way to understand her company is to experience it the way real passengers do. The room was dead silent. The attendant's knees felt weak. The realization hit her like a wave. The woman she had doubted, disrespected, and brushed off wasn't just a wealthy passenger. She was the reason they all had jobs. The manager sighed. The captain has already reported what happened. The company's upper management will review it. But for now, you'll remain on duty until they decide what action to take. I suggest you reflect on this and be ready to speak honestly when they call you in. The attendant nodded, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. Yes, ma'am. When the meeting ended, she walked slowly through the terminal, lost in thought. Every step felt heavy. She remembered the woman's calm face, her quiet words, her gentle tone even after being treated badly. There had been no anger, no pride, only quiet strength. By the time she reached the crew transportation area, she sat down on a bench and covered her face with her hands. She whispered to herself, "How could I have been so blind?" Meanwhile, in another part of the airport, the woman sat in a private lounge waiting for her car. Her assistant had arranged everything discreetly. As she waited, she received a message on her phone, a note from the airline's head of staff expressing their apologies and confirming that an internal report was being prepared. She smiled slightly at the message, but replied with a short sentence, "Please handle this with kindness. People learn better from grace than punishment." Her driver soon arrived, and she left the airport quietly. The city outside was alive with movement. Cars honking, people crossing the streets, buildings glowing under the afternoon sun. Yet she felt peaceful. She believed every event, no matter how unpleasant, carried a lesson, not only for the one who caused harm, but for the one who received it too. That night, she sat at her desk, looking out at the skyline from her apartment window. She had built her company from the ground up. Years ago, she had been an ordinary worker, often underestimated and ignored. It was those experiences that taught her to treat everyone with dignity. That's why she occasionally took flights incognito, to see her company through the eyes of a regular customer. She opened her journal and began to write, something she did after every business trip. She wrote about the flight, the service, and the incident, but instead of anger, her words were full of reflection. She wrote, "Pride is the easiest way to lose your humanity. Humility is the quiet power that changes hearts." The next morning, the attendant received a message from her supervisor. She was asked to report to the airline's headquarters for a meeting. Her heart raced as she got dressed, barely able to eat breakfast. On the ride there, her mind replayed every second of that day. The look on the woman's face, the silence in the cabin, the captain's serious tone. She feared the worst, but knew she had to face whatever came. When she arrived at the office, she was led to a quiet conference room. After a few minutes, the door opened, and to her shock, the same woman walked in, calm, elegant, and smiling softly. The attendant immediately stood, her voice trembling. I didn't expect—" "It's all right," the woman said gently, motioning for her to sit. "Please, let's talk." The attendant sat down slowly, still nervous. The woman looked at her kindly and said, "I didn't ask for you to be punished. I just wanted to speak to you personally. Do you understand why what happened was wrong?" The attendant nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I was wrong to assume anything about you. I judged you unfairly and acted unprofessionally. I'm truly sorry." The woman leaned back slightly. "Do you often treat passengers that way?" The attendant shook her head. "No, never. I don't know why I reacted like that. Maybe I was tired or stressed, but that's not an excuse. I let my attitude get in the way of my duty." The woman listened quietly, then smiled. "You know, I didn't build this company to make money alone. I built it to remind people that kindness and respect are what keep the world flying. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone learns from them. I believe you can." The attendant's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you for saying that. I'll never forget this, I promise. You've taught me more in one conversation than all my training sessions combined." The woman stood and extended her hand. "Then promise me one thing. Treat every passenger like they matter, because they do. You never know who's sitting in front of you. Sometimes it's someone ordinary. Sometimes it's someone who built the plane you're working on." The attendant nodded, shaking her hand with respect. "I will. I give you my word." As the woman walked toward the door, she turned back and said gently, "You don't need to prove anything to me. Just do better from now on. That's all the proof I need." When she left, the attendant sat there for a long time processing everything. She felt a strange mixture of shame and gratitude. That meeting changed something inside her, not just about how she saw passengers, but how she saw herself. From that day onward, she worked differently. She greeted people sincerely, listened carefully, and offered help before being asked. Other crew members noticed the change too. She became calmer, more patient, and even started mentoring new staff about handling passengers with empathy. The woman, on the other hand, continued her quiet inspections on future flights, but she never forgot that one day when she had seen arrogance turn into humility before her eyes. To her, it proved that the real measure of power wasn't how many people followed her, but how many she could help grow. And somewhere in her heart, she smiled, knowing that one small act of forgiveness had done what anger never could. It had changed a person forever. Weeks passed after that unforgettable meeting. The flight attendant carried the woman's words with her everywhere she went. They weren't just something she remembered. They had become something she lived by. Every day before boarding a flight, she would take a quiet moment for herself. She'd look in the mirror and remind herself, "You never know who you're serving, so treat everyone like they matter." Her coworkers noticed the change first. She smiled more, listened better, and moved with a calm confidence that wasn't there before. Even when passengers were rude or impatient, she stayed kind and steady. One of the newer attendants once asked her, "How do you stay so patient when people are difficult?" She simply smiled and said, "Because someone once showed me patience when I didn't deserve it." That small answer carried more truth than anyone realized. One afternoon, while the crew was preparing for another long flight, a senior manager entered the lounge carrying a stack of folders. She called the attendant aside and said, "There's a corporate event next week. The company wants you there. The owner herself asked for your name to be included." The attendant froze for a second. "The owner?" she repeated softly, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes," the manager said. "She'll be speaking at the event. And she specifically mentioned inviting a few employees who've shown strong improvement and leadership. You've been recommended." The attendant nodded slowly, trying to hide her nervous excitement. "I'll be there," she said quietly. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, thinking about how far she had come since that day on the plane, the day she had let her pride take control, only to be met with grace instead of anger. She still remembered the woman's calm eyes and kind voice. The thought of seeing her again made her heart flutter with both gratitude and fear. A week later, the event arrived. It was held in a grand hall filled with bright lights and elegant decorations. Employees from different branches of the company had gathered to celebrate years of service and success. People wore suits, shared laughter, and talked about their work. The atmosphere was full of warmth and pride. When the attendant entered, she tried to stay near the back, blending in among the other staff. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to listen and learn. But her eyes kept moving toward the stage where she knew the woman would soon appear. As the program began, the company's top executives spoke one by one, thanking staff for their dedication. Then, the lights dimmed slightly and soft music played as the announcer said, "Please welcome the founder and chairwoman of our company." The room filled with applause as the woman walked onto the stage. She was dressed in a simple navy outfit, elegant but modest, her confidence shining through her calm steps. When she spoke, her voice carried warmth and power. At the same time, she began by talking about her journey, how she had started with nothing but determination and how she had faced both kindness and cruelty along the way. She didn't speak like a business leader showing off her success. She spoke like someone sharing pieces of her heart. "I built this company," she said, "because I wanted to create a space where everyone, passengers and employees alike, would be treated with dignity, not because of money, not because of looks, not because of titles, but simply because they're human. And I've learned that sometimes we forget this when we let our assumptions take control." Her words filled the room with quiet reflection. The attendant felt a lump in her throat as she listened. It was like the woman was speaking directly to her again. Then the woman continued, her voice gentle but firm. "A few months ago, I took a flight. I was treated unfairly by one of our staff members. It was painful, yes. But it also reminded me why this company exists. Not to be perfect, but to grow, to learn, and to become better people every day. The person who made that mistake later showed more growth than I ever expected. And to me, that's leadership, the courage to change. The entire room was silent now. Every employee listened with respect. The woman smiled and looked out over the audience. That's why I've asked that person to join us today. Not to embarrass them, but to thank them. Because their story reminded me that grace is more powerful than pride. There was a short pause as she scanned the crowd. Would the flight attendant from Flight 318 please stand? The attendant's heart stopped for a moment. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. The woman on stage smiled warmly. There you are, she said softly. Please come up. The audience began to applaud softly at first, then louder as the attendant made her way to the front. Her legs felt heavy, her heart full. She could barely breathe as she climbed the steps to the stage. When she reached the woman, they faced each other for a moment. Two people whose lives had crossed in a way neither could have predicted. The woman took her hand and said, I told you we'd meet again. The crowd smiled and clapped. The woman turned to the audience and said, This young lady taught us all something important. Sometimes the best lessons come from the hardest moments. She showed humility, honesty, and change, and that's what makes this company proud. The room erupted in applause again. The attendant tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Finally, she said softly into the microphone, All I can say is thank you. I learned more from your kindness than any punishment could have taught me. I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life. The woman smiled and nodded. That's all I ever wanted. After the event ended, people came up to congratulate her, patting her back and telling her how inspired they were by the story. But for the attendant, the moment that mattered most was when she quietly walked up to the woman after everyone else had left and said, You changed me. The woman looked at her kindly. No, she replied. You changed yourself. I just gave you a reason to see who you really are. The attendant smiled through tears. I'll never forget that. The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. Good, then pass it on. Teach others what you've learned. That's how we keep kindness alive. The two shared a brief hug before parting ways. In the months that followed, the attendant continued working, but now she had a new role. The company appointed her as a mentor for new recruits, helping train them in service and empathy. She didn't just teach procedures, she told them stories. She told them how a single moment can define your whole career, and how the way you treat people can echo for years. Her sessions became famous within the company. People said she had a special way of making others listen, not because of authority, but because she spoke from the heart. Meanwhile, the woman continued to lead the company with the same grace and strength as always. She rarely spoke about the incident publicly, but every once in a while she would bring it up during training sessions, always ending it with the same line. We don't grow when everything goes right. We grow when we choose to make things right. The story spread quietly through the airline. It became something of a legend, not about punishment, but about forgiveness and growth. Even passengers who heard about it admired the company for the way it valued people over mistakes. The attendant never let the fame go to her head. She remained humble, still serving flights whenever she could, still greeting passengers with that same gentle smile that came from a genuine heart. Every now and then, when she'd pass by a window on a flight, she'd look out at the sky and remember that day. The day her world had nearly collapsed but instead turned into the beginning of something new. And though they rarely met after that event, she always carried a quiet respect for the woman who had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to change. Months turned into a year, and life continued to move forward. The flight attendant had become one of the most respected members of the airline's staff. Her name often appeared in company newsletters, mentioned in quiet admiration by those who had worked with her. She didn't seek praise, but people naturally noticed her warmth and sincerity. Every time she stepped onto a plane, there was a calmness around her. She no longer rushed or snapped at passengers. Instead, she looked at every traveler as if they were someone important, because in her mind, they were. She remembered what it felt like to be misjudged and never wanted anyone else to feel that way again. Her coworkers often came to her for advice. Some had their own stories of frustration, long hours, tired feet, rude passengers, or stressful flights. She would listen quietly, never interrupting, then say softly, "It's not about how others treat you. It's about what you choose to give back." One morning, during a layover in another city, she sat at a small cafe near the airport. The place smelled of fresh coffee and baked bread, She watched people coming and going, all in a hurry. It reminded her of her old self, always rushing, always anxious to move on to the next thing. She smiled to herself, realizing how much she had changed. As she was about to finish her drink, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the corporate office. The subject line read, "Invitation from the chairwoman." Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly opened it and read that the owner of the company wanted to see her for a private meeting. No explanation, just a date, time, and location, the company's main headquarters. She felt nervous, wondering what it could be about. Had she done something wrong? Was it about her mentorship role? But then she remembered how kind the woman always was. Whatever it was, she told herself, it must be something important. The day of the meeting came. She dressed neatly, choosing a simple blue dress and a pair of flat shoes. She wanted to look respectful but comfortable. As she entered the tall glass building, she was greeted by friendly staff who guided her to the top floor. The elevator opened to a large, bright office with tall windows overlooking the city. The woman was standing near the window, looking out at the skyline. When she turned, she smiled warmly, just as she had before. "It's good to see you again," she said, motioning for her to sit. "It's good to see you too," the attendant replied, her voice soft but steady. The woman sat across from her and said, "You've done very well. I've been watching your progress, and I've heard wonderful things from everyone you've trained." "Thank you," the attendant said quietly. "I just try to do my best." "I know," the woman said, "and that's why I wanted to talk to you personally. I believe you've become more than just a good employee. You've become a role model. Not everyone can turn a mistake into a message that helps others. That takes humility and strength." The attendant felt her eyes grow moist. "You gave me that chance," she said. The woman smiled. "No, you earned it." For a few moments, they both sat in silence, the sound of the city faint below them. Then the woman leaned forward. "I've been thinking of starting a new training program," she said. "Something focused on empathy and service. I want to teach people not just how to serve customers, but how to respect people. And I'd like you to lead it." The attendant's mouth fell open slightly. "Me?" she said, almost in disbelief. "Yes," the woman said. "You've lived this lesson. You've experienced both sides, the mistake and the recovery. That makes you the perfect person to teach others." The attendant didn't know what to say. Her heart was full. I'd be honored," she finally whispered. The woman smiled. "Then it's settled. I'll have my assistant work out the details. You'll be traveling to different branches, meeting with crews, sharing your story, and helping build a culture that reflects what we both believe in. Kindness, growth, and respect." The attendant nodded, still overwhelmed. "Thank you. I'll do everything I can to make you proud." "You already have," the woman replied. Over the next few months, the attendant began her new role. She traveled to different cities, meeting crews from around the world. She stood in front of rooms filled with new attendants, sharing her story honestly, not to gain sympathy, but to help them see the power of change. She told them about the day that changed her life, about how one moment of anger had nearly cost her everything, and how forgiveness had given her a second chance. She described how fear had turned into growth, and how she had learned that treating people with kindness wasn't just part of her job. It was part of being human. Everywhere she went, people listened closely. Some cried. Some came up to her afterward, thanking her for reminding them that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you choose to grow from them. One day, after a session in a distant city, a young attendant approached her. She looked nervous and said, "I really needed to hear your story today. I was about to quit. I thought I wasn't good enough, but you made me realize I can start over." The older attendant smiled gently. "You can always start over," she said. "The only time it's too late is when you stop trying." That night, as she sat in her hotel room, she opened her window and looked out at the sky. The lights of the city twinkled below her like stars on earth. She thought about how life had taken her full circle, from being the person who made a terrible mistake to someone who could now inspire others not to make the same one.